Climbing is a complicated sport. It's not just physical, it's not just technical, and it's definitely not just about trying harder. Strength matters, technique matters, but psychology is always there in the background. It affects your breathing, your attention, your decisions, your pacing, and your ability to stay relaxed. All of these things are tied together, and because of that, improving at climbing takes more than just effort. It takes understanding, it takes self-awareness, and it takes honest diagnosis. When people first start climbing, progress usually comes quite quickly. You get stronger, you move better, and almost everything you do seems to work. But after a few years, plateaus usually show up. And the question is this: why do climbers plateau even when they care a lot and are trying really hard? I think one big reason is that climbers often respond to struggle in the wrong way. They try harder, they do more, they add more volume, more intensity, more effort. But they don't stop and ask what the real problem actually is. And that matters because climbing gives you a lot of misleading feedback. You get pumped on a route and assume you need more endurance. Maybe you do, but often you're getting pumped because your execution is poor. You haven't prepared for the route properly, you're making false moves, you're over gripping, you're wasting energy. So what feels like an endurance problem is often an efficiency problem. The same thing happens with strength. A move feels powerful, so you assume you need more power. But sometimes the real issue is body positioning. If your hips are in the wrong place and your feet aren't set properly, your skeleton isn't going to support your body weight very well. Then of course, the move feels way harder than it should. So what feels like a strength problem can actually be a positioning problem. I've experienced this loads in my own climbing. There have been plenty of times where I felt like I should be needing more strength, when really a subtle adjustment in body positioning makes all the difference. I've had the same thing happen with my hands as well. Sometimes just learning to place my thumbs differently on a hold has changed a move from feeling desperate to feeling much more secure. Both these lessons come up for me on Rain Shadow, which I mentioned in the last episode. Some of these reasons are exactly why climbing can be so deceptive. Sometimes the difference between impossible and possible is not a massive physical change, it's a subtle technical adjustment. That's also why trying harder can be such a trap. A lot of climbers assume that if something isn't working, they just need more effort. But trying harder too early often makes people worse. It narrows attention, it reduces reflection, it makes it harder to relax. Breathing gets shallow, the body gets tense, and you become more likely to tip into fight or flight. Once that happens, decision making drops. You rush, you overgrip, you miss detail, you make poor choices. That doesn't mean effort isn't important, of course it is, but timing matters. Most of the time, the goal is not to try as hard as possible. The goal is to stay relaxed, stay composed, and move efficiently. I only really want that fully try-hard switch when I'm close to my physical limit, or when a move is right at the edge of my capacity. Any other time, I want calm, I want clarity, I want efficiency. Because one attempt can either be a random effort, or it can be deep practice. A lot of climbers think improvement comes from piling in loads of attempts and getting completely blasted. And for a novice, that can work for a while, because early on, almost anything works. But later on, that approach catches up with you. It leads to frustration, poor learning, poor recovery, injury risk, and eventually a plateau. As climbing gets harder, it becomes less about trying harder and more about climbing smarter. Before an attempt, you want to reduce as much noise as possible. Physical noise, mental noise, emotional noise. Because your attention needs to go into the right things. Touch, breathing, pace, body positioning, subtle adjustments, and relaxation. You can't do any of these things well if you're stressed, guessing, and emotionally reactive. You need to be poised and you need to be calculated. That's the difference between effort and execution. Effort looks like aggression, noise, force. Execution looks like detail, planning, exposure, and reflection. And this is where visualisation becomes so powerful. Visualisation sounds vague to some people, but I think it's one of the most useful mental tools in climbing. It helps with memory, confidence, body awareness, and execution. It's the process of mentally rehearsing a climb in as much detail as possible. You can do it in third person or first person. Third person is useful for understanding body shapes and positions. First person is great for sharpening the actual feel of the climbing experience. When I visualise a route, I want detail. I want to imagine pulling onto the start holds, placing my feet, taking those first breaths, and moving through each sequence. As I walk through the climb, I want to feel how the holds feel, how steep the wall feels, how each foot lands. That kind of rehearsal reduces uncertainty, and when uncertainty drops, performance improves, beta gets clearer, false moves reduce, movement gets more efficient, and it becomes easier to relax. This links into fear as well. I've experienced fear of falling in my climbing plenty, but I don't think the answer is always just practice falls. Sometimes it is, but not always. Especially on bold trad routes, where falling off actually isn't an option. For me, one of the biggest shifts was focusing more on my breathing. That gives me something present to anchor my attention to, something immediate, something controllable, something that stopped my mind running too far ahead. I'm a control freak by nature, but over time I've learned to turn that into a strength rather than a weakness. Instead of needing to control the outcome, I try to control the things I can actually control in the moment. My breathing, my attention, my preparation, and the quality of my execution. That's been far more useful than just telling myself not to be scared. And I think that matters, because a lot of climbers think that the thing they fear is the fall itself, when often it's uncertainty, loss of control, or the feeling of not knowing. And diagnosis is difficult, not because people are lazy, not because they don't care, but because we all see climbing through our own lens. Your habits feel normal to you, your emotional patterns feel normal to you, and your blind spots are hard to see from the inside. That's why certain mistakes can repeat for years, and sometimes diagnosis threatens the story we tell ourselves. It's easier to say, I need better endurance, than it is to admit that you lose composure under pressure. It's easy to say, I'm weak on small holds, than to admit that your body positioning is careless. It's easier to train harder than admit you're scared of failure, or that you care a lot about how other people see you. Sometimes people don't avoid diagnosis because they don't care. They avoid it because the truth is uncomfortable. And ego plays a role here too. Let's be honest, we all care. We all want to be good. That's normal. Ego isn't always bad, but it can make us blind. Trying harder feels tough, fingerboarding feels serious, and more volume feels committed. Whereas slowing down, reflecting honestly, fixing your footwork, rehearsing properly, addressing fear at its root, and improving your lifestyle are much less glamorous, even though they may feel more effective. Lifestyle matters here too. Poor sleep, poor nutrition, stress, dehydration, chaos in life. These things don't just reduce recovery, they also reduce your capacity to learn, and that's massive. Because climbing isn't just about physical energy, it takes brain energy too. You need mental energy for reflection, composure, decision making, for noticing detail, and for learning. So if life is chaotic, you're not just more tired physically, you're less able to improve. For the first few years, you can improve doing almost anything, but sooner or later, everyone hits a plateau. And when that happens, I don't just think about grade, I think about attitude as well. To me, a novice isn't just somebody who climbs easy grades. A novice is somebody with a novice attitude. Chaotic effort, poor calculation, weak body awareness, inconsistent reflection, and always trying harder. We can climb hard and still have the attitude of a novice, but if you want to keep improving long term, you need something else. You need better planning, better diagnosis, better recovery management, better self-awareness, and a more systematic approach. Because as climbing gets harder, progress depends less on doing more and more on understanding more. So if you're plateauing, ask yourself a few honest questions. Is strength really the issue? Am I climbing reactively or with clarity? Do I understand the beta well enough to avoid false moves? Am I rehearsing properly? Am I ironing out inefficiencies, even the subtle ones? Is my lifestyle actually supporting recovery and learning? Because if you don't start asking better questions, you usually keep repeating the same wrong solution. And I think that's really the point of this episode. If you care a lot and you're trying hard, but you're still stuck, the answer might not be more effort. It might be better diagnosis, better execution, better reflection. Because the climbers who keep improving aren't always the ones trying the hardest. They're often the ones understanding the problem more clearly. Thanks a lot for listening. I'm Matt Wright, and this is episode 2 of A Climber's Mind. I hope there was something in there that helps you reflect on your own climbing a bit more deeply. If you want to follow along, I'll be diving further into these ideas in future episodes. I also offer personalised remote coaching through mattwrightcoaching.com, and if you'd like some help, you can visit the link in the show notes below.